of the ECRI definition, or what became the ECRI definition. And they have to understand the history. With the rise in anti-Semitism in the late 1990s, it became clear that the European Union, the European Commission, needed to do something. So they started a survey of anti-Semitism, but increasingly they were hearing from police, from human rights commissions, from those who were monitoring, that it was difficult to define anti-Semitism in that context. They said, 1939 to 45, we knew what anti-Semitism was. Now we don't know. If there's an anti-Semitic or an anti-Israel daubing on the wall opposite a synagogue, is that anti-Semitic or is that anti-Israel? We don't know how to measure. We don't know how to define anti-Semitism. So the European Commission and its monitoring centre asked a number of academics and activists to draft a definition. Well, to cut a long story short, there were many, nearly 30. Some of them were very long. They were very academic. And what the Commission said was, we want a definition that is understood by a policeman on the streets of Plotzk. Something simple. So we gathered together all of these different definitions, and 3 of us went to Vienna to negotiate with the European Union Monitoring Centre, which is the forerunner of the Fundamental Rights Agency. And we finally arrived at the definition, which became the EUMC definition, and then with the advent of the Fundamental Rights Agency, became the FRA and then the ECRI definition. 10 years later, ECRI took it over. They rearranged the order of the words, but essentially it's the same definition. The point is that it deals with contemporary anti-Semitism. And as I said, sometimes anti-Zionism serves as a cloak for anti-Semitism. In Europe, in the 2020s, to say that you're anti-Jewish is politically difficult, particularly after the Nazi era. So if you say, oh, I'm anti-Israel, it has a slightly softer approach. And so people will say, oh, I'm anti-Israel. But their words, their actions belie that. What they actually mean is they're anti-Semitic. So the ECRI definition is the best definition. There have been others put forward, but they're mostly by academics as a reaction to ECRI. They weren't asked to do it. They didn't come forward. They had no practical experience. I mean, those of us that actually drafted it and negotiated it were people with practical experience of fighting anti-Semitism. I've spent the last 30-plus years training policemen and prosecutors. That's my main area of work now, not just in the UK, but around Europe for an intergovernmental security agency. I work with the cops. I know what it is they need. I think I know what it is they need. And it's not some academic definition like the Jerusalem definition or some of the others, because the people that wrote it are academics. They don't have the practical experience.
That's correct. Academics are always academics. It's difficult.
And I'm not an academic.
Yeah, I'm academic myself. It's sometimes difficult to move from the academic space into the practical space. And when it comes to anti-Semitism, yes, we need the academic perspective, but we also need actionable plans. Yes. And this leads me to the question, because I've already discussed the situation of anti-Semitism among European populations. But since you are in the Council of Europe and you oversee governments, I mean, let's discuss what the European governments are doing to combat anti-Semitism. There is a European Commission coordinator for combating anti-Semitism. Many European countries have their own offices of combating anti-Semitism, except I think in France, it's not a uniquely for combating anti-Semitism. It's a mix of anti-racism, anti-LGBT, but it's not a specific office for anti-Semitism. Is Europe doing enough to combat anti-Semitism, given that, I mean, what we have seen on October 7 says no?
The short answer is no. But what is being done has been more beneficial than if nothing had been done. To compress history, the European Union, the European Commission, its agency, formulated a strategy for combating anti-Semitism. And that requires European Union member states to have a strategy, which can be a standalone strategy, or it can be part of a general anti-racism strategy. It doesn't matter. They also have to appoint a high-level envoy who will act as the mediator between the Jewish community and government, and who will push government, say, the Jewish community says this, this, and this, but you have to respond to that. So that's a very important role, the envoys. And nearly all European Union states now have an envoy. And they are changing legislation as a result of the work of the European Union and the Council of Europe. My own commission publishes advice to governments in the form of general policy recommendations. I chaired the policy working group on anti-Semitism, and we asked governments to take certain actions, and we check that they do. They don't get off the book if they don't. We go back and check. We don't have hard sanctions if they don't, but nevertheless, we can point out that they're failing because if they are members of the Council of Europe, they undertake certain things. So the short answer is that were it not for what has been done in the last 5-10 years, I think the situation might be much worse. We now have every European state virtually recognizing the threat of anti-Semitism and taking some form of action, either because they've modified their legislation or because they've trained their policemen and their prosecutors and the judiciary, because they're educating. It's vital. You've got to educate kids, not just about the Holocaust, the Shoah. You've got to teach them about living Jews, the contribution that Jews are making now even. So with all of these actions, I think the situation is better than it would otherwise have been. The problem is that whilst we've educated governments, we haven't necessarily educated the people. And that's where the gap is, and that's where I think our focus has to be from now on.
Back to the people. In Europe, as well as in the UK, what is the source of anti-Semitism? Is it left? Is it right? Is it Islamic anti-Semitism? Christian anti-Semitism? Who is who in all of this?
It's coming from all different directions. 39 to 45, even up until the 80s, it was coming primarily from the far right, from the fascists, the Nazis, the neo-Nazis, or those who had far-right views. Not necessarily Nazis as well, but people who believed in the supremacy of white Europe. Since then, we've had the advent of Islamist anti-Semitism, and I've written a great deal about this, particularly Ikhwan and Iranian anti-Semitism. And I had seen the influence, particularly of the Ikhwan in European states, particularly after Nasser's crackdown and the escape of Ikhwan leaders, the Muslim Brotherhood leaders, to Turkey and to the UK, to southern Germany as well, to Munich, and their influence on Muslim communities. And of course, particularly in the UK, you've got a parallel organisation to the Ikhwan, which was formed at the same time in the 1920s in India, which has similar views. So the influence of these Islamist ideologies is growing because they're very active. If you look at the most active organizations in Europe, they are often Muslim, but they are often Muslim influenced by Muslim Brotherhood. And then, of course, now also we get it from the left. As I said earlier, the left was always anti-Zionist because it represented a form of nationalism, and they were against nationalism. But we see it now increasingly from left, primarily amongst young people who are often really quite ignorant. They're ignorant about their own history. They're ignorant about the history of their countries.